Hello. Doing a review of case study 13.2 titled Cut Her Some Slack, we will be advocating for Mimi's grade change. Group 2 consists of Erica Colbert, Brian Gant, Julie Knight, Stacy Lee, and Jeremy Ramos. Thank you.
Positionality and the turbulence theory. There are four levels of turbulence that are used to categorize dilemmas within the college or university setting. Light turbulence is used to define issues that happen on a daily and weekly basis. These issues are usually successfully handled and resolved with normal administrative actions. So these are issues that are seen on a daily basis, and not much disruption is caused to daily processes or operations. Moderate turbulence are problems that have the ability to get the attention of everyone involved and possibly even those who are outside of the academic unit or that particular department. These types of problems are atypical. They are not normal to the daily, weekly issues that are faced in an everyday college university setting. Severe turbulence, these are issues where normal administrative actions are not sufficient for successful resolution. Specific processes and strategies are usually needed to resolve these types of issues. And lastly, extreme turbulence. And this is where the structure of the institution is in real time being threatened. The destruction of the institution is real, it is happening at that moment. So, the four levels of turbulence are used to illuminate the degree of disruption represented by the dilemma. An important aspect of turbulence theory is positionality. And positionality also affects the level or the degree of disruption that defines the dilemma. Positionality imperatively calls for educational institutions or leaders to be empathetic to the turbulence that students experience. So it's important that educational leaders, when we're looking at turbulence, that we understand where the student is coming from. And we will see how, if we look at Mimi's present situation, how turbulence in her position could have an important impact on the decision to change her grade. Mimi's frame. The turbulence level, moderate. But before getting into the turbulence level, I'd like to establish Mimi's positionality. Her position is that she is an international student from Malaysia. She is a first generation college student, so she is the hope of her family. Her mom and dad are relying on her to graduate, and once she graduates, getting a good job in order to assist them financially and to help with the family. Her parents are people with limited means. They do have jobs, but they don't earn a lot and had to take out a loan to assist Mimi in her final semester. Mimi has been coping with language and cultural differences. And I think that's important to note. I think that's important to keep in mind. She hasn't been thriving, so to speak, but she's been coping with those differences. And I think that should be taken into consideration. So the turbulence level and moderate as defined as a category states that these types of issues have the potential of getting the attention of everyone involved. So Dr. Morgan is the department chair, but if Davis Alvarez is adamant about not changing her grade, this could potentially move to the dean's level and or the provost level. So once again, getting the attention of everyone involved. And this type of issue is atypical. International students are usually a specialized population, and a lot of times they're on a case by case basis. And lastly, making the decision to change the grade can be framed ethically, and a lot of times that is an issue when changing grades. So when we look at it from the care and critique perspectives, it can definitely be considered an ethical change. Shapiro and Gross state that each administrative decision carries with it a restructuring of human life. And to be adamant about not changing Mimi's grade would be the literal restructuring of Mimi and her family's life. Framing it from an ethics of care perspective, who would be hurt by the decision not to change the grade? Mimi and her family would be hurt, and not just from an aesthetic point of view, but economically and socially they would be hurt. Will changing the grade hurt the university? Will it hurt the academic unit? And so, looking at it from the critiques perspective or frame, the questions of class, race, gender, and other areas of differences also come into play. So we can equate Mimi's positionality with her cultural differences, which should be considered in this decision making process. Will changing Mimi's grade silence the university or the academic unit? Does it give or take away power? Does it obliterate laws, rules, and policies? If the answer is no to those questions, then the decision to change Mimi's grade to a passing score is framed ethically.
While reading the case study, I read a couple of lines of a conversation between Dr. Morgan and Mr. Alvarez, where they kind of went back and forth, and it made me think about the different leadership frames that we had discussed in a previous module. Dr. Morgan tells Alvarez how important it is that Mimi graduates. Her parents are flying in. He talks about Mimi returning to Malaysia, and I believe he was trying to kind of touch the emotional side of Mr. Alvarez. Mr. Alvarez's response was that he believes international students should not receive any special accommodations. It's very strict. Mimi's not participating in class. She doesn't follow the rules. I'm going to fail Mimi. So the question I have for the other group is, what kind of leadership frame do you think Mr. Alvarez displayed? As I looked through the frames, structural frame came to mind, only concerned with the rules, the regulations, and some of those detriments to that frame is that you can't overlook people. I believe he overlooked Mimi as an individual. Uh, no rapport with Mimi was established at all. If he would have taken more of a symbolic approach, um, he could have possibly gotten to know her, created a connection, been able to maybe inspire her to kind of go outside of her comfort zone a little bit regarding her culture, to participate in some of those class activities, and possibly got some outside support from the university to help her out in class. Shapiro and Gross 2013 state that those facing ethical dilemmas in the midst of busy organizational lives need to respond in a deeply reflective, systematic fashion, as well as take into account the emotional context of decision making. I don't think Mr. Alvarez did this at all. And for that reason, I think that Mimi should have a chance at possibly changing her grade. Some of the additional multiple ethical paradigm terminalist theory perspectives that I also thought about. Um, Erica mentioned in previous slides that this type of issue may have been atypical within a university. Can Mr. Alvarez's behavior possibly create not just moderate, but even severe turbulence within the international community at the school? Mr. Alvarez was very matter of fact about how he felt about international students. Um, it's been my experience that those types of things can easily turn into rumors and easily go throughout the campus. I can easily see how this stance could be viewed as a wider spread issue from the community. And all of a sudden now you have to have special sessions or things of that nature because it's a very emotional situation and the university needs to address it. When reviewing this case for Mimi's grade change, I like to present some arguments for other groups to kind of take a look at. In regards to ethical decision making, there was a quote within some of the reading that stated, ethical decisions and decision makers reflect honesty, integrity, fairness, due care, responsibility, and accountability. Mintz 2014. Mr. Alvarez is an adjunct professor at this university. It states that he's considered an expert in his field, and it also states that students love having Mr. Alvarez as a teacher. After finding out that some of his assumptions about Mimi were wrong, can he confidently fail Mimi in this class? Some of the things that Mr. Alvarez stated about Mimi were the following. She had no class participation. I ask you, did he ever pull Mimi to the side privately and ask her if there was some reason she wasn't participating? Stated that Mimi had horrible English. Did Mr. Alvarez ever at any time contact student services about Mimi, possibly for language support or English as a second language? He also stated that Mimi was always on her phone checking Facebook. During those times, did he ask Mimi to put up her phone or possibly walk over there to her to find out what she may have been doing on her phone? We have a lot of students who now take notes, whether it be on the phone, iPad, etc. We later found out that Mimi was actually using this to assist with her language barrier. Then finally, he states that he doesn't know how Mimi has gotten this far in school. At any time, did Mr. Alvarez possibly contact an advisor for life coach intervention or maybe mentorship? If he did, maybe he would have been able to talk to Dr. Morgan, who's the department chair, early on in the process and maybe alleviate some of these issues before they came to this point. So, in looking at all of this kind of in a macro level, I believe that there's a lot of things that Mr. Alvarez didn't do as a representative of the university for his student. In that vein, I believe there can be some kind of grade change possible on Mimi's behalf.
Mimi's grades should be changed because her cultural expectations should have been considered and they weren't. The public behavioral expectations of a Malaysian woman can be very different compared to other students. For example, Malaysians are generally very conservative and reserved people, and females will probably not maintain eye contact as long as a male due to their shy nature. And this would explain why she struggled with working in groups and working with other people, male and even other females. If she didn't know them, if Mimi didn't know the other females, she would have acted the same way because of the fact that she could have been very shy and appeared to be, or why she didn't ask for help. Malaysians are very indirect people, and sometimes it is difficult to understand and comprehend what they mean, and this would explain why Mr. Alvarez thought that her work made no sense. The instructor also failed to see that there was a cultural difference present. Students bring so much diversity to a classroom, and Mimi's background wasn't even considered. There was no differentiation for her, and no accommodations were made to help her be successful with learning in Mr. Alvarez's classroom. Malaysia is mainly a male-dominated society, so Mimi asking her male teacher for help seems very unlikely, and I'm not sure how Mr. Alvarez could live with his decision to not change her grade or to even consider basically listening to Mimi's mentor when he tried telling her, I'm sorry, when he tried telling him, Mr. Alvarez, who she was and like where she came from and what type of person she was. And as Mimi's mentor, he took that time to try to explain what type of person that Mimi was. And Mr. Alvarez just didn't have the time for that. And Mintz Mintz offers, in the article, What Does It Take to Make Ethical Decisions in the Workplace? Mintz actually offers some tips in making ethical decisions in the workplace. And for example, there were 4 of them that I thought would have been very helpful if Mr. Alvarez could have considered them. Like, consider how your actions affect others, do no harm, which means your actions and decisions should never harm other people. And 3, make decisions that are universal by asking yourself whether you would want others to resolve conflicts by taking the same actions that you had in a similar situation. And reflect before deciding as a final step. And clearly, there really wasn't much of any of that in the decision to not change her grade. So there's no doubt in my mind that this student's grade should be changed to at least a C, due to the instructor not intervening and providing this student with what she needed to learn in his class.
When looking at ethical decision making, risk stages of ethical decision making takes into account moral sensitivity, moral judgment, moral motivation, and moral character and courage. As we look at these areas when put into case with Mimi, we can begin to recognize that this is an issue, that this needs to have a solution, and that there needs to be an action. Next, there's the possibility of a cognitive bias and barriers of decision making. First of all, does the professor know all of the facts of the situation? Is he only looking at facts that support his response and his reasoning for not passing her grade? Should we look at ways in which we could be making an alternative solution? Next are the consequences. Is the professor looking at consequences based on his self-interest, or is he looking at the interest of others? Even with a small number in this decision, it could have a larger impact. Looking at the potential future benefits is important as well.
Hi everyone. Please take a minute and put yourself in Mimi's shoes. Right? As an international student, do you feel supported? Yes or no? Would you have felt supported by Mr. Alvarez? Yes or no? If I were her, I would not feel supported. I would say my needs were ignored. An environment was not conducive for everyone to learn, especially myself. Right? I was prejudged by my assumption of being on my phone all the time instead of having my professor come over to me, ask me if everything was okay, asking me if there was anything I needed help with, or even asking me to put my phone away. And that way I can let him know that I'm using my phone for translation, right? I can't understand things well. My comprehension, my penmanship. This is like borderline belittling me, exploiting me, telling Dr. Alex Morgan that my efforts were not good enough because I was shy, I was doing this, and I was doing everything that all the other students weren't. Meanwhile, no one reached out to me. Right? No one considered my cultural barriers. No one considered me as a student. They just felt like I was a statistic sitting at the chair. Right? Just waiting to take a test and exams and papers. I don't find that as a current school counselor, that's not cool. This is not like a right ethical decision. Our ethical decisions only considered when professors, administrators want pay raises, or there are gender biases or political issues going on within the university or some type of misconduct, right? Those are not the only situations when ethical standards come into play. And do not by all means represent Mimi and her efforts in trying to become the first person in her family to achieve higher education. From an ethical standpoint, I believe Mr. Alvarez did not handle himself, in an appropriate manner. And one of the readings, Mintz 2014, states, virtue ethics recognizes that the person must be honest, trustworthy, fair-minded, and so on for the decision itself to reflect these characteristics. I don't think he was fair-minded, let alone honest, especially talking about this to his department chair, Dr. Alex Morgan. He completely belittled Mimi and her efforts in trying to learn. So, but moving forward, I also want to mention that McDonald and Company mentioned about one of the most important tasks of higher education, especially this day and age, is to help students. They have to put their knowledge to practical use, and I don't believe he was aiming to do that. Furthermore, McDonald and Company mentioned about 5 ethical principles, 2 of which I found vital in mentioning in this debate. One of them is doing no harm. Okay, all individuals' needs should be considered when making a decision. That is accurate as possible. Okay, everything has to be considered. Its importance is vital when making an ethical decision. Doing no harm. The next principle, being faithful. This principle involves being trustworthy, keeping promises, and respecting others by not exploiting them or their rights. As an international student, I know she's not a U.S. citizen, but come on, there are human rights. You got to walk with humility. You have to treat everyone with the same respect as you want yourself.